Okay, so the recording has started.
Thanks.
So, and I'll share my screen.
Perfect.
And this is the document that I sent out beforehand. So hopefully people have had a chance to look at this. But this is what came out of the last meeting,
Mhm.
um, that included Kim and the committee chairs plus one, and that then it was presented to the full commission, not for any action at the commission meeting in May, but just for an update. So it included um, the vision, which is a shorter, more compact vision than the current vision, um, a slightly revised mission, and then the what being the core areas of work.
Mhm.
And then the thing that kind of came out of the last meeting is most of these ABCD things that are
Mhm.
underneath each of the goals. Um, so supporting a robust network of volunteers and service hours, um, which A is kind of the entire age range from youth to older folks, rural to urban, corporations to individuals, and then awards programs, which um, is essentially like our Governor's Volunteer Stars Awards, our School Award of Excellence, those kinds of things, and also um, the um, Champion of Service Award that the commissioners can do individually. So
Mhm.
anyway, just the various award things. Um, Building capacity for volunteer success, then volunteer placement, grant making, programming, primarily being AmeriCorps, but there are a few other smaller ones. And then volunteer promotion and engagement. Then the third kind of main work area is maximizing the value of communications and partnerships. And then information awareness, celebrating and encouraging individual volunteers, supporting corporate volunteer programs, community engagement, story collection and storytelling, and then sponsorships. And then the fourth is operational, so operating with excellence. So board and resource development, financial oversight, bylaws, infrastructure, and personnel supervision slash management. Um, so that's the work that came out of the last meeting. Um,
Right.
and I think that if I remember correctly, kind of the discussion coming out of the meeting in May, the next step for this group to start to consider is, um, are there some like specific goals that the that this group might want to start putting into this framework, and it might be like specific number goals, but um, it might be other kind of non-specific goals. But I think that's so essentially taking this document and starting to make it a little bit more concrete in terms of what do we hope to achieve at the end of 3 years, um, in terms of outcomes and outputs, um, at least as an initial start on that discussion.
I remember we also talked about how we wanted to frame these four broad core areas into either our current structure of
Mhm.
committees or changing the structure of committees. Maybe we can talk about that just a little bit with this group.
Um, I recall that conversation as well. Like looking at, maximizing the value of communications and partnerships. You could just call that communication and partnerships. Operating with excellence could just be operational excellence. Just giving them kind of themed names,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which would create four groups.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed like kind of amalgamation. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I like that word, and it just came to my head of like the existing committees, but working in kind of a unified way, kind of like communications and strategic partnerships is already kind of morphed into maybe what number 3 would ultimately become. And maybe that's worth consider. Well, I think there was some discussion about whether people's groups just kind of fall under these new categories and they work together, or whether people would newly select the groups that they would want to work on.
Because we had some committees that are very light with participation. And I do feel, I don't know that it makes good sense of our time to start setting goals for these areas if we're going to put them back into the committees. I think that would be something that the committees would want to do and commit to. But I don't know. I know we've got the communications and strategic partnerships and probably board development, number 4. Yeah. That is that right? Does that sort of fit in with board development, number 4?
It does look like board development. I will say I'm not. Who is our board development point of contact? I know Eileen is. Okay.
I think it's Greg now.
It's Greg Lyles.
Okay.
And then we have our grants committee. And let's see, volunteer programming. I'll wait till Jim. Yeah, there we go. Supporting our volunteers and service learners.
I'm seeing some overlap, of course, between the different goal areas. And I'm wondering if we should take a look at that. So for example, in area number 2, okay, we have C, volunteer promotion and engagement. And then under 3, we have B, celebrating and encouraging individual volunteers. So they, like there is an overlap between those 2. And, so I'm not sure, if that was intentional on our part, or if we want to try and minimize overlap as much as we can. And then, of course, under 1, we have awards programs, which actually is celebrated. If we're thinking of that as the GVSA, that actually is 3B, celebrating and encouraging individual volunteers. So I think if these goal areas are going to break down into the committees, we might run into some snags there as to which committee is responsible for which part of volunteer promotion, engagement, encouraging, celebrating.
No, I agree with Eileen, and I think part of it is probably the language that's on the screen. So if I harking back to, I think the big not the committee meeting, our most recent full commission meeting in Nashville, where we presented this high level. I think what it is, if I remember correctly, this is just me, I'm not referencing any notes, so this may be incorrect, but the way we had talked about it is goal number 1, supporting a robust network of volunteers and service learners. That particular goal is specifically around the volunteers themselves, the people that are doing the work that is volunteering, right? So how do you increase the number of volunteers? How do you bring awareness to volunteer opportunities? How do you recognize exceptional volunteers? So I think from that lens, the A, B, C, D, I think makes sense, right? It's the actual volunteers, the people themselves. Number two, when I hear capacity building, it's not the volunteers, it's the organizations they're volunteering with. I think, again, this is me trying to, so I think when like volunteer placement, grant making, volunteer promotion and engagement, in my mind, I'm thinking less about the volunteers and I'm thinking more about support mechanisms to help nonprofits or partners recruit volunteers, increase volunteer capacity. So that could be the Tennessee Serves Network. That could be funding and grants. That could be. So this is support for the partners. The first goal being support for volunteers themselves. And I'm assuming the reason number 3 looks like the kitchen sink is likely
because it is.
yes, is likely because it's communications. And I think so. I'm wondering if when we say celebrating and encouraging individual volunteers, I wonder if what that really meant was just like uplifting the stories, like not so much. Because to your point, Eileen, I agree. Like when I hear award programs under number 1, that's the actual like GVSA. But I think what was intended under number 3 was how do we better just raise awareness and highlight, not so much give an award, right? But in all of our marketing, all of our communications, and all of our networks, how do we share stories of success? Whether that be individual or group? I think that's the difference. But I agree with you. Reading it this way, they all kind of look like the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think trying to figure out, and part of it may be that there needs to be a little bit more action, even if there's not numbers, right? Like instead of saying celebrating, encouraging individual volunteers, I mean, do we need to play with the language a little bit to make it make more sense, right? So is that language uplift? I mean, it's really story collection and storytelling, right? Yeah, so I'm wondering
it's
if they're
actually
just
part of storytelling.
Yeah, I think maybe it's just cleaning it up a little bit, perhaps, to make it make a little bit more sense.
Maybe we could add B2E, story collection, storytelling, which support. I can't see it now. The support. Well, it's gone.
Or highlights, which highlights.
Sorry, I moved. Are you talking about in 3? I moved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I moved it to be
Incorporate
under.
that one.
Yeah, under D.
Yeah, I think
That
in my mind, Terry, going back to your comment,
makes
I think we need to make sure before we hand this document back to committees, if we have questions about the document and we give it back to committees, they're going to likely have the same, if not more questions, right? So it needs, however we decide to move forward from here, I think it needs to be in a way that committees are confident that as one of those committees, right? Like what is the task before the committee? Like, right, what are we really asking the committee to do? And I don't know if we've really identified that.
You know, Nathan, your clarification really got me kind of recalling that conversation about like the focus and it seems like what it is, it's volunteer organization systems and then internal capacity for Volunteer Tennessee. And then people just kind of choose when serving on those committees what type of thing they're most interested in focusing on, whether it's how to directly support volunteers, the organizations that support them, the systems that support the organizations and the volunteers collectively by elevating story and other features, or if they're interested in looking inwardly to support the infrastructure of Volunteer Tennessee. That seems pretty intuitive, actually, in terms of like the ways you can kind of frame your work on the commission.
Yeah. Like who are your targets, right? Yeah, no. And so do you all envision, so in theory then from that lens, at least in our current committee model, not assuming we're doing any drastic changes in our current committee model, that could mean a committee could be working in within multiple goals in a different ways. Is that accurate? Or no?
If we were to maintain the current committee model, I suppose that would happen potentially. In some ways, I almost wonder if, like, if I came into the commission, instead of being presented with a collection of committees, being presented with these kind of focal areas and working with a group that's focusing on the focal area. Also, in terms of like shifting between, there's also kind of an interesting dynamic there where you might come in and you're pretty close to like volunteer management. So maybe you come in and you're real interested in working with systems that directly support volunteers, but maybe you do that for a year or two, and then, you know, it's like the idea of supporting the organizations might be like a really intuitive trend, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I'm trying to think through next steps, like what's the logical, right? It's like, here, everyone, here's this document, run with it. I don't think that's a great guidance.
I've been on the communications committee since I joined Volunteer Tennessee, and that committee has always had areas that we were dealing with in all the committee work, because we're communications. We're communicating what's happening within all those areas. And so I'm trying to think, if someone came in and we said, would you like to work with specific volunteers, or would you rather work with the organization or partners that actually house those volunteers or further? My feeling is that this person could potentially serve on three different, I don't want to say committees, but that's what they are, three different committees, with those committees at different times. So I guess my question is, do you think our group is ready to expand from committee work to specific goal work? You know, not attached to, I'm on the committees, I'm on the communications committee, so I'm not meeting with board development, but so do you think we're ready for that shift?
I'm always ready, Terry. What are we doing?
Yeah, I mean,
and it's a valid question. Because at the end of the day, whatever it is that we decide to do, it needs to be done in a way that we actually have the capacity and
yes,
and the interest and the dedication to do, right? We can build the greatest structure in the world, but if it doesn't align with the folks and the people that are actually having to execute, then the greatest plan can mean nothing really, right?
But I also feel, I feel two ways. One way I feel is that this group that we're working with right now are very visionary. I think they're worker bees. On the other hand, I feel like we're in a place where people are sort of losing enthusiasm. So if there's a way we can get that enthusiasm back into whatever work we create here and get those worker bees and those visionaries back at task, I feel like we can do great work. I really do. I think we're going to have to be a little creative.
Well, like thinking about the conference and the GVSA, you know, I feel like while maybe that was maybe in a specific category, because it's such a, you know, such a big event for Volunteer Tennessee, if it ended up being, you know, 1 through 3 collectively working on it, it would bring more people from more pieces together to work on different pieces of it. So like, okay, we're going to work on the story, and we're going to engage the organizations, and we're going to engage, like there's ways to subdivide and to have those kind of main activities become something that multiple pieces can work on intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
and more opportunity to kind of collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I like it because I feel like that seems more organic and actually aligns with the way that people conduct work, right? Like when I think about, I feel like right now our strategy, whether on paper or it's just culturally how it's happened, has been that we have all these programs within Volunteer Tennessee, and there's this sense that, again, maybe informally, but that they're owned by a particular committee. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that's really in the real world how anything works,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you think about, you pick any topic, right? I think about the corporate social purpose network. Right now, the corporate social purpose network, for the most part, everyone would say is directly kind of housed within the strategic partnerships plus communications committee, right? And in reality, though, it's like there's a component of corporate social purpose network that is absolutely like partnerships and communications, 100%. But the big portion of it is also that they're really interested in is doing corporate volunteerism. Well,
Mm.
that's direct volunteering. And there's
Mm-hmm.
an opportunity to use the Tennessee Serves Network to do that, right? And there's an opportunity to recognize corporate. So that one program in and of itself touches goals 1 through 3.
Mm-hmm.
Now but I think historically that's not how we've talked about it, right? It's like this one
Right.
thing is owned by this committee and they're the leads on this project. And it's like
Right.
not really, right? And but I think you could say the same about the conference. I think you could say the same about GVSA. There's a communication component to all of them. There's a
Mm-hmm.
programmatic partnership component to all of them. There's a
Mm-hmm.
professional development component to all of them. And I think by allowing a committee to touch one project from a different angle. I think, yeah, I agree completely with Jason's point is I think it elevates, it encourages some collaboration, and it allows people to kind of own the portion. You don't want somebody to be like, oh, well, I can't support corporate social purpose because I'm not on that committee and it's not my thing. Well, no, if you've got something really interesting and a connection and a resource and an idea, come forth. Right, like, and I think that just that shift in language and culture I think allows that. um I like that, I like that.
Because like we recognize organizations at the GVSA, right? Like, and we recognize individual volunteers. We tell the story of that. So like different people within our group, some could really lean into like, how do we get every county participating?
Mm-hmm.
How do we reach out to volunteers? How do we connect them? The organizations can figure out how do we reach out to organizational representatives that are being recognized or engaged in unique ways around this particular activity. And the storytelling could broadly kind of connect to all of that to be like, okay, so you have these volunteers that have these really great stories, you have these organizations, maybe there's some other strategies that can be applied, but like that subgroup would be thinking about the narrative formation. The volunteer piece would be thinking about how to engage and connect in like the volunteer experience in terms of like being recognized at the GVSA. And then even when you go to the conference, just thinking about the conference in terms of like, okay, maybe somebody really wants to focus on like, how do we get AmeriCorps members to participate or volunteers to participate, but somebody else might be thinking about like, how do we get these organizations that run these programs to bring that kind of material or participation or sponsorship to it? And then someone else is thinking about how do we tell this story? And then, the fourth being kind of internal, what can we do to support the people that are like making this all come together? Just really kind of
Mm-hmm.
encouraging collectivism around these kind of core projects we do. Because when thinking about outcomes or like measurements, those things can be, that they can even be broken down into signature events because those are the things that we actually do, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there might be a way to like deconstruct GVSA and the conference. There might be ways to look at the Galaxy digital platform that we're using. And so maybe one component is people thinking how do we promote this to individuals and volunteers to get them engaged? And then another group, how do we market this? And just like breaking it down by these core function areas. I mean, I even think about Don and his work with the CERT teams and things like that, and how can, again, breaking it down to the CERT volunteer, the organizations that support those, maybe help getting them signed up so that they can support volunteers, and how to market that. It all seems to kind of break down in a kind of intuitive way along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask, and this is probably a Jim question. I'm liking this direction of this more collaborative kind of cross-sector approach. My question being is, from a staffing perspective, how would that, Jim, because I could see how that could potentially complicate. I know right now we've essentially loosely got staff members assigned to offer support to various committees, while also, of course, in their day work, like, certain, like, Latifa has corporate social purpose, right? Or Candace has X and that sort of a thing. So what does that look like, or could that look like from a staff perspective? Because I now also don't want to say, oh, now if we do this, take this approach, Candace now has to be in every single committee meeting that happens because every committee's touching her projects, right? Like, and
Yeah.
that seems like very quickly would become quite overwhelming and unmanageable for anybody. I mean, I one committee meeting on a monthly basis is a lot. 7 becomes quickly. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a problem, although the communications committee is the only one that meets on a monthly basis. The others meet on a quarterly basis. So, if we continue to have mostly quarterly meetings, it probably would be okay. But it would potentially be a problem if every committee wanted to meet every month and need every member of the staff to be on that committee call. It's that very quickly could become a challenge.
Okay.
So
that's helpful.
But
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like this idea though. I mean, I'm thinking about the conference. I'm thinking about Candace, right? And I think about the ability for Candace to be with one particular committee one day and having a conversation specifically around how do we better market and promote, right? That sounds like a conversation probably for communications, or how do we find sponsors? But then on another day, she's still talking about the conference, but she's specifically talking about the award processes, and right, like with a different committee, and the ability for that one project to now touch a lot of hands. The other thing I like about this, and this makes me think about Corporate Social Purpose Network, some of the feedback we've gotten around Corporate Social Purpose Network has been that outside of communications and strategic partnerships, a lot of commissioners just don't really know much about it at beyond the highest surface level. And part of it is because they don't have anything to do with it, right? They're not supporting it in any way. They're not touching the work in any way. So they just kind of hear that language in passing, but there's really, there's no expectation that they would need to, right? So this idea of everybody's at least at a surface level touching everything, even if it's just very high level, I think also encourages a little bit of a culture for the commission as a whole to at least know the high level version of what's happening in all the key spaces. I think it promotes that kind of organically, right? Just by being, everything's going to get at least briefly mentioned in a meeting, right? What does this look like in practice then? So let's say if we were to go this direction, what is the next step? How do we get it into a place that the committees could actually respond to something?
You're
I think you're muted,
Eileen.
It seems to me that it would be helpful to annotate this outline with with the projects that might be covered by that particular item. And we've got a little bit of that already. right? We have the awards programs, GVSA, Award of Excellence, Champion of Service. If we do that as much as we can, it will then, when the committees need to work on it, then they'll be able to associate a project,
Mhm.
which then becomes our action items when we have to do
Mhm.
that form. So I think that would be helpful.
Mhm.
We've done a bit of it already. I think it'll also, kind of bring out where the outliers are, in this outline. So for example, and under one, we have from youth to older Americans, from rural to urban, from corporations to individuals. That's really almost one thing. It's like we want to reach everybody.
Mhm.
So is that really three different goals?
Mhm.
And so maybe it's just expanding connectivity and access to a broader range of Tennesseans, of all ages and regionality.
Mhm.
Just a statement like that that's inclusive of,
Right.
which is kind of like supporting a robust network of volunteer and service learners. But maybe it speaks more towards like the intentionality of expanding what that tent looks like. And like thinking about projects, it seems real intuitive that particular group for the GVSA could really champion getting participation, helping identify like how to get people to apply or participate in the nomination process, or maybe it's a collaborative effort between that group and the organizational group to figure out how do you get every single county represented.
Mhm.
At that, there's like some very tangible activities and outcomes that can come from that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like your idea, Eileen, about annotating this.
Mhm.
Then when it goes, if this document, as we're working on it now, goes back to the committees, it's not like we're only looking at number 3 if we're on communications and partnerships, or we're
Mhm.
only looking at number 4 if we're board development, but we're actually looking at the entire document and seeing, what we feel would be an actionable step.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think
Yes.
the same could be said about the programs too, as we're annotating,
Mhm.
right? So like just the way the committees may touch multiple programs is also recognizing that one program may touch multiple different goals, right?
Mhm.
So when I think about goal 1, which is about volunteers, and I think about goal 2, which is about the organizations, Tennessee Serves is serving both of those populations,
Mhm.
right? So that Tennessee Serves in and of itself and the Galaxy Digital platform, one in my mind, a goal would be to increase the number of volunteers that are on the platform and utilizing the platform across the state,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, you also want to increase the number of organizations that are utilizing the platform. But those are two different goals, but both around the Tennessee Serves platform, right?
Mhm.
And two
Mhm.
different committees may be working on those goals, right? One committee may really be focused more on getting more volunteers, and another committee's focused more on getting more organizations, but both on the same platform.
In the past, when we've done the strategic planning around the state plan, there is always we identify our goals, and then we identify areas of overlap, and then
Mhm.
there's like a portion where we're trying to reconcile that.
Mhm.
But I think this would more intuitively identify potential, like what the areas of overlap are, but give people distinct roles within those overlap areas, which might maybe lays like a more like a mutual groundwork for which to discuss, like, oh, our overlap is obviously going to be working on the Tennessee Serves network. We're looking at these pieces, but when we do our kind of group work, we know that like we're specifically talking about the organizations, for example, and we're specifically talking about that. And then we can kind of figure out like, well, obviously we're both working on the same type of end goal. So like, how do we kind of blend these ideas together, which again, creates kind of a space for collaboration that might be a little bit more intuitive because it's centered around these very tangible tasks.
Yeah. The silence.
I
Yeah,
wonder
something else that's kind of a program or a project is site visits. Because I know that in our previous year's plans, when you look at the plan, not when you go to the individual action items, but when you look at the plan and then you see the little acronyms following each item, and it would say site visits, grants committee, communications, whatever other ones. But we never did know, well, okay, so what is grants supposed to do around this? And what is what does board development do around this? And this method could help to expose those kinds of holes.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, well, this is one of our goals, but we've never done anything with this thing before. That kind of thing.
I was kind of wondering if we took out the listing of the committees from this document and just take it back to the committees and say, how does this group of people feel that where does what we're doing fit into this document, or what are some goals that we think could be attainable? Rather than if we give it to them this way, of course, Nathan's on this committee, so he would know that we want you to look at 1, 2, and 4, not just 3. But when I see committees assigned or there at the beginning, it's kind of like, okay, this is what we're focusing in on.
Yeah. It you're saying allow every committee a better opportunity to evaluate themselves in every goal.
Yeah.
Not tied, not leading them inadvertently by.
Yeah, exactly. Letting them come to their own conclusions about, where they feel we can put some action steps.
Okay, I'm going to take like 12 steps back because this has triggered something in my mind from one of our commission meetings. Is a part of our struggle, I know part of this is also going to be, in addition to working on this document and giving it back to the committees, I know one of the things that has come out in our big commission meetings has been clarity for the existing committees on, I don't want to say what their lane is because we're trying to get rid of the lanes, but what their area of focus is, right? Like, when you say the community right now, our Frankenstein committee, communications and partnerships committee, like really what is the purpose of that committee? Because part of me is also thinking through, if I give this back to my committee, I already can picture in my head at least 2 people that I know that are specifically going to say, well, what really is the role of our committee? What is our job? And I don't know if I have 100% solid answer for that question. I mean, communications, I think, is probably the most straightforward and easiest one because like it's in the name. But partnerships, it's like, to what end, right? Is it partnerships in terms of like we're just trying to increase awareness amongst partners? Are we wanting money from partners? Are we like, what does that really mean? So I feel like these are 2 different. I know we keep talking about the state service plan, and then we also talk about the committee restructuring as 2 different processes, but I feel like they're rubbing each other and like one can't happen without the other one. I don't know if that makes any sense. I just feel like there's 2 people on my committee I know, and I think it would be a valid question. Like, what is the role of partnerships committee? And I would say that's a hard answer. It's a hard question to answer.
Well, then we go back to our discussion about, do we want to keep the same committee structure?
Right. I mean, in some ways, I think breaking it down so people fall into these 4 committees and then paralleling them to the actual activities of Volunteer Tennessee makes a lot of sense. Like kind of like 3 and 4, when thinking about like what is the partnerships piece of it, there is sponsorships. And so I think about like 4 being very kind of like inwardly focused.
Mhm,
3 is kind of
mhm.
like the broadly ecosystem outwardly focused. So while number 2 is working on like organizational partners for GVSA and 1 is working on volunteer partners, 3 is maybe looking more at like fundraising, storytelling, and the things that make that broader effort successful and sustainable, while 4 is supporting the people that are doing it with retreats and other activities.
That's it in a nutshell, Jason. That's perfect. How do you guys feel about, instead of putting committee names down, maybe we put some of those bullet words that you just used, Jason?
This is recorded, right?
Yeah, well, I hope so.
Yeah, you said like for number 4, it's the infrastructure. So, a good term for that might be, well, you've got internal operations, operating excellence. Is there a better way to put it? So, structure.
Yeah, just, internal operations and board infrastructure,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, inward focus. Like
Mm-hmm.
3 and 4 seem like 2 sides of a coin, where the other is also focusing on infrastructure and sustainability, but it's doing so by being outward facing and telling the story, leveraging external support, while the board development or the organizational excellence component is focusing on building that capacity of the board members and like their
Mm-hmm.
kind of mutual understanding of their collective actions.
I like um, excellence. I like the word you used, operating with excellence. Maximize communication partnerships. And so the other side would be the outward, the value of communications. Trying to think of a way to put number 3 so it's not communications, but
I mean, I don't know if I mean, communications is communications. I don't know if there's really any other way to right to slice it.
yeah, you're
I
probably
mean, I
right.
think looking at what we have here on the screen, I do think if we're able to somewhat pair, like Jason just said, pair the existing committee structure to this document, at least loosely, it may not be a perfect match, but at
Mhm.
least loosely pair it together. I think a part of what I really want to make sure that I feel like there's enough on here for the committees to very clearly see, okay, this is the task before. Let me think about how to engage in that goal, right? The goal number 3. Here's the goal. Here's how to engage in that goal.
Yeah.
What I think I think, and maybe we just have to say this, maybe it's not even on the document, maybe it's a part of the prompt when we have these committee meetings, is just being able to say, although this is the goal, this is the goal before you, don't limit yourself to how you approach the goal, right? Again, it goes back to, I don't want communications committee to say like, oh, X, Y, and Z is not our thing. That belongs to, so like that's the language that needs to go away. It's
Mhm.
the exclusionary language, right?
Mhm.
Um, it because
Mhm.
then communications is going to do communications. I mean,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess it's like, how do you give communications permission to talk about the conference? How do you say it's okay to talk about the conference? It's okay to talk about the Tennessee Service Network. It's okay to talk about AmeriCorps. Like you could talk
Yeah.
about those things and it still be communications. I just
Right.
don't know
I mean,
how to do that.
Is it community partnerships and communications? So there's like organization, so there's like individual, organization, then community,
Mhm.
and then Volunteer Tennessee board.
Mm-hmm.
Could be.
Hmm.
It also could just be us wordsmithing at this point. It may be all, you know.
Could be.
Sometimes I'm like, we'll
Ex-
wordsmith and end up back on where we started probably.
Well, I think the most important thing that we're saying here is that we want all the committee groups to look at all 4 areas and
Mhm,
contribute what they feel are actionable steps.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
without the expectation that, you're only looking at one because your committee fits in with that one goal.
Mhm. Yeah. So essentially, we're asking them to take off their committee hats while they're reviewing
Yes,
this. Like, view it
exactly.
as a commissioner, right? Like,
Yes.
view this
Yeah.
from the lens of the work, not so much the structure that you exist
Yes.
in, right? So even if you don't think that thing's your thing, but you have a cool idea, put it down anyway, so
There
we
you
can
go.
talk about it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's just that. Maybe it's just the way we
Mhm.
present this as take your hat off, don't worry about
Mhm.
current structures,
Mhm.
view them all from any lens. Just view
Mhm.
them, and if you have an idea or you think something makes sense, put it on paper. Obviously, we're not necessarily going
Mhm.
to do all of it, right? It's still a working document. But I think that then at least gives us, if we get everybody's ideas and everybody's thoughts around all of these goals on one document, we
Mhm.
then can go in and make it organized in a way that logically you can follow,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and maybe that's the task for a committee meeting. I feel like that is a manageable
Mhm.
task. Like, let's pull this up and let's just go down it. And people throw
Mhm.
out, like, don't worry about, even if it's not our thing, you have an idea for the conference, just throw it out
Yeah.
there. Just put
Yeah.
it on the paper, right?
Yes.
That seems very doable and tangible. Like, that seems a specific ask you could make of a committee.
I think so too. That's good. I like how we've worded things now so that, they can look at each area as a committee and talk about any ideas they may have and bring those back together to this group again,
I,
would you say?
I think so. What I would say is I think trying to do this on a call, it's just difficult, right? Like it's just difficult when we're all like in the moment. So part of me almost wonders if we do that, the committees all take their time to contribute to this document. I'm wondering if obviously we need to come back together and talk about it at some point, but I'm wondering if there's value in us offline mapping out some options, right? Like, hey, I'm going to play with the document. I'm going to map it out in a way from Nathan's perspective. And then, because now I feel like when we're on the call, we've got some things to actually respond to. And it's not just this
Mhm.
organic, let's add this, let's delete that. No, we like it. Let's add it back. Right. And,
Yeah.
and that's just, it's just natural. That's just what we do. But the chance for Eileen to look at it and like, well, let me take a jab at it in my own time, and Jason can do the same, and then maybe we're able to pull back together and all of us kind of show our options and see if there's some
Okay.
common overlap, right? Because I imagine there probably will be. There'll be some common things that maybe stick out of all of our plans, and you're like, oh, that must be really good because we all thought of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I know sometimes just sitting on a call for an hour and just trying to work through the weeds,
Mhm.
it's just hard. It can be very difficult, right? I mean, we're doing it right now. It's difficult work.
Yeah, it is.
But I feel like we're moving forward. I know it
Mhm.
feels like we're treading, but I think what we've done here today is we've got something to go back to the existing committees and get some feedback and ask for just some, give me your feedback. What do you think about this? What are some
Mhm.
ideas you have for this?
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Eileen, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, yeah, it kind of brings me back to one of my very early comments, and that is balancing the committees in terms of people. At this point, I mean, if I if I were to take this back to my committee, there would be me and Adam and what's his name? Who never
Lee.
shows yeah, Lee. Who's very often too busy with his work to attend. And so I think that maybe, like maybe somehow under our item number 4, where we talk about board and resource development, that, to kind of work on a way to balance out committees. I mean, what we've done is we've always allowed new board members to select what committee they want to be on. It was pretty much, try out this committee. If you don't feel comfortable with that committee, try out another one. And so, we ended up with, like one or two committees that are very, very popular, and, a couple committees, specifically there's board development and grants that haven't been that popular. And they're small committees, and the committees have still been able to get their work done, but it really limits the work that those committees can do, and also the discussions that those committees can have, the brainstorming that they can do, because there's, not very many people to brainstorm with.
You're right.
I just want to, sorry, Terry, just throw a quick time check. There's about 3 minutes left in the hour. I mean, if folks want to keep going, we can certainly keep going, but just for that time check.
Thank you,
I gotta
Jan.
head out. Have another meeting right after this.
Can I throw this to the group then? And I do as well. Based off of that feedback, and Eileen, I appreciate that because I agree. And going back to what we were just talking about, like the discussion's helpful, but sometimes it can also be a hindrance. Is there value in us sharing this document and collecting some feedback and initial thoughts from folks, even outside of a committee meeting? Like, I mean, I don't want to, I hate to over survey people and do all the things, right? But is inviting Bob to sit down and just look at this on Bob's own time and say, hey, Bob, throw some thoughts on here, right? Like, I mean, even before you have a discussion, because like, is there value in that, or is that more work? Is that right? Because again, if I take this to the committee, our next committee meeting, and I pull this document up, we have a bigger committee because it's the combined committee, right? We ain't gonna get through all these in an hour. Like, we're not, right? So I'm just wondering, is there a way to, even before the committee, like, you still discuss them, but is there a way to just say, hey, take a look at this, throw it together? I mean, it's because people could be working on it now, even while we wait on next committee meetings, right? So I don't know if that's helpful or if that's more work, Jim. I don't know what that looks like, Terry.
Well, we could certainly send it to the people who are in this group. The people who are in this group who were, invited to attend this meeting and didn't make it. We could certainly send it to them, because they should know, what we're going to be throwing at them.
Yeah. Maybe that's a starting place. It could be. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can do that, and or send it to the full commission. I mean, that's in years past, but pre-COVID, the commission exclusively did its business in person at its quarterly meetings. And at those quarterly meetings, we would break up into committees, and the committees would have their meetings in person with the people who were there. And then we also had quarterly calls with those people would then kind of continue to do their work. But then COVID kind of threw all that out the window. And for the plan that we did 3 years ago, or were working on 3 years ago, most of that was done through surveys, because, so we started out with surveys and collected information from from individuals, and then put that together, and then the committees kind of discussed those survey results, So I mean, we could certainly send out this information with some prompts for folks to add thoughts and ideas, changes, additions, subtractions, and then provide that, have that available for the committees as they get ready to dive into it.
Mhm.
And what I would suggest we do in terms of the committees is that that staff change the order of these for each committee,
Mm-hmm.
so that number 4 isn't the last one for every single committee, because otherwise nobody will get to it.
Smart.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yep.
And we can do the same for the survey. I mean, we can have Survey Monkey can randomize the order of the questions, so that the questions show up in different orders for individual survey respondents. Again, because even a survey that only has 10 questions, by the time you get to question 10, people are just like, check. So we can mix up the order of the survey, the questions in the survey. So however y'all want to do it, I think we can certainly send it out to everyone. That's just a matter of doing the survey and then sending it out and collecting the results. So it's not really any additional work to do that compared to just sending it out to this group.
Mhm. Okay. When we talk about the survey itself, I'm trying to think through, like, in terms of what we're asking folks beyond just what are your thoughts, right? Because that's kind of a I don't know how valuable sometimes that is, as opposed to if if we were to say here's a specific goal, right? So I think about the goal around increasing volunteerism, or whatever the top goal is, the supporting a robust network of volunteers, right? I'm like, if you give that goal, and is there a question or there are a series of questions under it, like 2 or 3, right? How do you see, I'm just making this up, this may not be accurate, but it's like, how do we prompt people to think about how can the Tennessee Serves Network do that? How can the Conference on Volunteerism and Service do that? How can, you know what I mean? Like, how do we kind of force people to think a little bit deeper beyond just what are your thoughts? Because then some of the thoughts may be, I like it or I don't like it. And that's not always super helpful, right? But it's like, what role do you see communications playing in this? Or, right, I don't know. If there's a way to phrase the questions that really force people to think outside of the normal committee buckets. I don't know what that looks like, so maybe that's brainstorming some questions. But yeah, I think a survey sounds good. I think it would give us a little bit more to work with, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so, and I know we're a little bit past time, but just capturing some of that, Nathan. So how can we achieve these goals with existing resources? But then are new resources needed? The other thing that might prompt people to think about it is a question of what specific outcome could you envision for this goal, to get people to think about, okay, what does it mean at the end of 3 years to say we have supported a robust network of volunteers and service learners?
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
In 3 years, what does that look like?
What's the end game? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Got it. No, I like that. And I like those questions. So you did it much better than I did, Jim. How can Volunteer Tennessee achieve these goals with existing resources? I think that's good because it's think through the goal and think about all the ways you might tackle that goal. No, I like that. I think that sounds really good. So I feel like that gives us something to work with. It gives us some more information, hopefully helpful information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I also have to hop off, I think, as well here in just a second.
Thanks, Nathan. Well, I can develop a draft survey and then send it out to this group for any comments before we then send it out to the full commission. So that could be kind of the next step, is a draft of the survey and then get some input and then send it out.
That sounds
Yeah.
good.
I think that would be good. Hopefully this is a very quick question. When we get to the point of documenting actual outputs and outcomes, we do we still have to put in the information to make everything measurable?
No, I mean, that's totally dependent on how the commission wants to structure
Okay,
the outputs and outcomes. I mean, it can be more generic, non-measurable things, but it could also be, we want to recruit an additional 10,000 volunteers above the baseline of 2025, just as an example.
right.
So however the commission wants to do that. Now, there is a component that of the requirements for the federal requirements for the state plan that directly relate to program stuff that's not really captured by any of this, but that's kind of a separate thing that we'll have to address, that the commission will have to address. And that does have some kind of measurable output stuff. But the overall plan can be whatever you all want it to be.
Okay, because I know that when we did the last 3-year plan, it bogged us down for a long time.
Yeah.
To make every output and outcome measurable. And then later on, when we evaluated them to see if we actually achieved them, then we didn't always have the information, the baseline information readily available to compare.
Yeah.
Last thing, we keep saying last thing. It's like what I'm just recalling back, Jim, on the current state service plan, the portion that has to do with older Tennesseans.
Yeah.
Where is that in this mix? Because we haven't talked about that at all.
Yeah. No, we haven't. So that is another federal requirement that each state plan has to have some specific components. I think we should, for the purposes of developing the commission's state service plan, should keep that stuff separate from this stuff. I mean, this stuff is like, this is more of the commission's strategic plan for the next 3 years. Then those other things are the federal requirements that have to be in this plan. Okay. And those things are very specific, and there's not any leeway in terms of what we say we're going to do, or, so anyway, I think this part is more open, and the commission can kind of decide what it wants to do. And then we can plug in those requirement things as part of the official plan.
Okay. Got it. That sounds good. Just want to make sure we weren't leaving something off we we're supposed to be doing. So.
Yeah, no. We can do that, but again, I mean, my opinion, and you guys can certainly overrule me, I think it's better to have the big picture visioning stuff be separate from the strict requirement stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I'm going to run. Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Eileen.
Thanks, everybody.
Jim, Rebecca.
Yeah, it's great to see you all. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Bye-bye.